Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Let's have a 420. I mean, it's almost 4:20 in the morning, so fuck it. Let's have a 420. Hard Bastard's video. Hard Bastard did a video essentially making the point that all of these media outlets are going with a very specific narrative in regards to Trump and Comey. Essentially warning Trump, don't you dare touch your hands on Comey. Don't you dare do it. Essentially threatening him. That's the argument that Hard Bastard is making. Now, Hard Bastard is to the right of me. And so we're not often going to agree on maybe details. But the left and the right have realized that the middle is fucking us over. And in recognizing it, that is a shared commonality. If nothing else, that's a shared commonality. We can argue, bitch, complain, moan, gripe, all that good stuff in earnest disagreement in regards to what we should be, what this country should be. But it shouldn't be influenced by cash. And it should have a level of honesty and integrity associated with the process. I'd argue that most of the time, it doesn't. It's usually influenced by cash, and it usually has no honesty or integrity associated with it at all, including media. So if him and I find commonality on that, fair enough. Like I said, we can argue about the other stuff. But at the very least, I need to know that the individual is earnest. Because, let's be honest. The system that we have is essentially media and politics somewhat colluding with one another to give a particular narrative. Both of those systems, however, purely rely on cash. Whether you're talking about these people buying newspapers and paying more money than they're worth, like the Portland Herald in Maine, the one that attacked Zoom Politicon, or for that matter, Washington Post. Washington Post. It's like, how do you trust a news organization that's been purchased by an intelligence agency? And I know the purchase was a backdoor or something like that, but whatever. I'm just saying. There's a lot of money that was invested into those things. And oftentimes those things are found out to be full of it too. That's the other part. That's the other part. So yeah, if we end up on this level of meeting at the point of integrity, then yeah, that's fine. He was analyzing this particular thing for Rachel Maddow. Rachel Maddow, again, given the narrative, don't you dare touch your hands on Comey. That was his take on it. There was another part with the Young Turks who did it. I have to be honest, this was hard to watch. Watching him do this video is like watching a caged animal. Like, you know he wants to go at him, and he doesn't go at him because of what they did to the last video of his. They silenced him. They hushed him. They sent him to the furthest corner because he was too rough with one of TYT's people. So he's in this mindset of, okay, I need to calm down. I need to be restrained. But you can tell that's a restrained anger. Like I said, it's a caged animal just waiting to go at him. But look, whether it's CNN, whether it's TYT, whatever. Let's think of it from the perspective of if these people weren't serious. If they weren't serious. Like, the animosity that Hard Bastard is portraying, that a lot of people portray, and even me sometimes, is somewhat misplaced because ultimately these people are playing roles determined by other factors. So, Rachel Maddow is a Democrat. She's a Democratic mouthpiece. Whether she knows it or not, she's a shill for the Democratic Party. I have no clue whether that's some kind of formalized arrangement, but she functions at the behest of the Democratic Party. She's been running one conspiracy theory after the next for the past 6 months. Attacking Trump. Never talking about the other side. Never talking about why they lost all those people and why those people hate that party. Never talk about cheating Sanders. One very specific thing. Trump is going to eat your babies if you don't get him out that office. Now, functioning as a Democratic mouthpiece, you go to the other news agencies. Trump has called these people fake news over and over and over again. And for the most part, there was a level of animosity between Trump and the press throughout the entire campaign. Complete animosity. There were times where the audience would turn around staring daggers at the press because ultimately they looked at it as, put it this way, Trump made a point of contention with the press and those people followed suit. you can understand how a news agency may be against that. So let's say a neutral news organization, usually neutral, for the most part, has a president in that office that they themselves probably believe is dangerous. And in believing is dangerous, they are also somewhat burned by the things that happened during the primary. Now, the Democratic Party comes out with the narrative of Russia did it. They follow it uncritically. They follow it. Now, do they follow it uncritically because it's just a great story, or do they follow it uncritically because we don't like that guy? That guy's dangerous. What I'm getting at is, if your institutions have either some kind of bias in the sense of dislike because of something that took place, because look, these things are made up of people. They're made up of people. I mean, you can say what you want, but ultimately there are people who are at those things. If he's saying you guys are fake news, you guys are fake news, he's attacking the press over and over and over again. Is it crazy to think that the press will have some animosity back in that sense? Whatever the press is, whatever those structures are, do you think there'd be somewhat antagonistic towards him? And if you add in an element that they think he's unstable and they just generally dislike him, do you think they would follow a narrative that's adversely against the object of that disgust? Yes. The Democratic Party, Republican Party, and the press, for the most part, particularly the centrists, have a certain relationship. They don't want people upsetting the apple cart. Trump is a wild card at best. Now, in being a wild card at best, though, it's possible that the press looked at it as the arrangement with the Democratic Party in that sense. And I'm not saying this is a form of collusion. I'm making a point that it's very possible that the reason why they follow that narrative in that way is because they think he's a dangerous element and they're pissed off at him for all the shit he said about him during the primaries. That's what I'm getting at. The Democratic Party, for its own sake, they're Democrats. Their candidate lost to a reality show host. That is the most embarrassing thing in embarrassing things. So the Democratic Party don't want to talk about themselves. They don't want to have an autopsy. They've made the decision that ultimately their sole existence, their sole point of existence, is to oppose Donald Trump. Even though nobody knows what that means. Does it mean you just oppose him for everything? Do you oppose him for some things? I mean, if the TPP went down, I like that. Are you going to oppose him on that? I don't know what that means. What does it mean? And what is your legislative record? What does your party represent? Those are the things that are important, and those are the things that you choose not to answer because you can't answer them, honestly. And not just that. You believe that Trump is going to essentially get out that office one way or the other, and you're going to use one attack after the next to pin him, to constrain his behavior. My argument is the Democratic Party is using this Russia to constrain his behavior. I don't know whether they believe it or not. I'm just saying, it's like in chess, you pin a piece. If you notice, Trump made mention when they were talking to Comey that it was constraining his behavior. I believe that he probably did say that because that's true. It constrains what he can do with regards to Syria and Russia. So I don't think he's crazy for saying, look, this Russia stuff is constraining me, it's pinning me. But it's also taking up time. All the time that takes up is less time he can do damage in that office. I would wager that that's what Democrats are thinking. Whether they believe the Russia thing or not, I would wager that they're looking at this as he's tied up with this. There's a special prosecutor. He may get taken out of that office, or at the very least, it will tie him up and tar who he is. That's, I would argue, is the Democratic perspective on this, which is why the Russia thing came up, which is why they're going and harping at it this much and all this other stuff. I would wager that the news part is just, we dislike the guy, and we full well think the guy is a menace and a threat. I don't think you need, look, I trust less what people say, and I trust the incentives that drive them. I think as human beings, ultimately, we're emotional creatures. Even if you come up with an intellectual reason for doing something, ultimately, that emotional base is there that's intangible, unspoken. But at the very least, it's there, and you know it's there. Meaning, you know whether the thing is true or not, that it ties them up. You're going to know it in your gut. Regardless of what you tell anybody else. You know in your gut that that's what's taking place, and emotionally you are bent towards doing it. So yes, I'm going to trust the emotional part. Because the intellect will come up with reasons to justify that emotional part. That's why I trust it. My model is usually just based off of what are the incentives built into the structure. What do the people want to achieve? What do they have at their means to try to achieve it? It's game space. That's the way I see it. So, I understand what Hard Bastard is saying. I guess I would make the point that you're right. But you're right not because these guys are earnest and serious. I would argue you're right because for their standpoint, it's the best option they have without necessarily dealing with some kind of autopsy. Ultimately, they need to deflect attention. So yeah, they deflect attention. I think it may be as simple as that. He's a Republican, they're a Democrat. They need to find ways to constrain their opponent. Their opponent is in office. They need to limit the damage. They're in damage mode at this point. So yeah, they're going to do things to try to lock him up and tie him up. They're going to try to put him in knots. They're going to put him in knots for as long as they possibly can put him in knots. Because as long as he's in knots, he's dealing with those knots. Yes, that's what they're going to do. The press is not going to give him any favors. He attacked the press relentlessly. So yeah, they're going to toe this line somewhat uncritically. And they're going to make the people think that there's this big thing with Trump and Russia, even though no connection has been made between Trump and Russia. And the press is also going to follow a narrative of saying that there was some level of Trump trying to stop him. I didn't hear that in the testimony. I didn't hear it in the testimony. And beyond not hearing it in the testimony, what I did hear in the testimony was that Comey changed information to coincide with the Hillary Clinton campaign. Crickets. Crickets. Do you honestly believe Rachel Maddow is going to have that conversation about that? No. She's going to leave her audience completely invisible to the fact that Comey was being influenced by Loretta Lynch. Now, Loretta Lynch was appointed by Obama. Ultimately, the Democrats in office was trying to affect the FBI director in the way he was explaining things, and maybe even in the way the case was handled itself. He doesn't necessarily want to implicate himself, so no, he's not going to say something like, I was told to do X. But is it just completely unimaginable that if Loretta Lynch is getting him to change the testimony based upon the Hillary Clinton campaign, that she may not have somehow exerted some level of influence in other ways in that case? Her ass should be dragged in front of Congress. And this is not me being political. This is me being as apolitical as possible. You're affecting an election. This is the only apparatus we have to change our particular system. When you have one government changing over, that is a changeover of power. Literally, that's a toppling of one government and installing another government. It is done in a certain procedural way because they want to get across to the public that, yes, this previous government agrees with this other government, or at the very least hands over power in this formal way. It's done that way because usually it's done at the end of a sword. So if you're destroying that apparatus that allows the public to make a choice on who they want, if you're literally getting the FBI director, the structures of our government itself, to conform itself to the campaign of one of the candidates, that's gross. It's absolutely gross. And she should be called to account to figure out, what did she say to him? What was the conversation he had with Bill Clinton? And what, if any, other influence was being brought to bear upon Comey in that testimony? What I would say to Hard Bastard is he's right. Ultimately, these guys are being unfair to Trump in this case. The point I would make, though, is they're being unfair because for them, this is their best move. Look at it as a game of chess. What would you do to hold up your opponent? And think of it from the standpoint of how people behave. What is your gut reaction to things? What is your emotional thing that pushes you? Like, you may not acknowledge it. You may not even know it's there. But if you're being honest and you listen and you thought about it and you felt for it, it's there. It's an emotional push. Your intellect explains it. They can see it on CAT scans where the person would be asked a question or something like that and their emotions will come in. They can see it in the CAT scan. They can see it in the brain. The emotional center being stimulated, followed by the logic center. The logic center explaining the emotional center. That's why I always think these guys function at the behest of somewhat of a games, the incentives. I focus on incentives because ultimately those are the things that are going to determine how something ultimately behaves. The person will have to buck and go against the incentive in order for it to be true, and usually that's not true. So I'll end it at that. Yeah, dude, you're right. You're right. They are colluding. They are colluding. Whether it's formalized or not, they are colluding. You have one side that is politically powered to do so, and the other side that hates his guts, gets a good story out of this whole Russian narrative that keeps people watching. And I would wager even they may have some affiliation a little bit more with the Democratic Party than Trump. In which case, after being vilified and everything else, yeah, they may toe a particular narrative that they don't necessarily have the stuff to back it up if they were being fair. Or at the very least, would be a little bit more skeptical if they were being fair. You're right. You're right. You're absolutely right. They are colluding. TYT being added to the mix, I'm not surprised. The interview with Elizabeth Warren and Cenk Uygur. It is the worst interview in the history of interviews. It is the worst interview in the history of interviews. And if that's not Chuck Todd obliviousness on display, I don't know what it is. So, yes, they probably are functioning to some level like the other people because ultimately they chose to vote for Hillary Clinton. They chose to vote for Hillary Clinton. They think that man is a menace. They think he's an absolute terror and he's going to destroy democracy. So they're, again, making this choice on fear to do whatever they have to do to toe the line to attack Trump. They came out with one attack ad every day for what, like 270 days or 30, 50 days or something, some ridiculous amount of time. So yeah, they're going to do what they have to do, just like the mainstream media is going to do what it has to do to go after the guy. You're not crazy. You're not wrong. They are colluding in that sense. It may not be in direct, but yeah, it is an indirect collusion based upon the rules of the game space or the incentives of the game space. So, ended at that. Alright guys, if you enjoy the content, feel free to share, like, subscribe, and you can always support the work through Patreon. Thanks.